My phone buzzed just as the morning sun poured through the glass walls of my studio. The city looked alive, glints of traffic lights bouncing off steel buildings, coffee steam curling from my cup, and my reflection staring back from the window. Confident. Composed. But inside, there was that familiar ache. The kind that never really leaves you, no matter how far you've come. The caller ID read, Dad. It had been 3 weeks since our last conversation, the one that ended with him saying I was lucky my pointless job even paid rent. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. Hey, Dad. He didn't waste time with small talk. Your mom's not feeling well, and your brother's college fees are due. A pause. Then the line that made my stomach tighten. From now on, you'll cover your family's expenses. You're the successful one, right? Let's see what your career's really worth. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I looked around, the walls filled with framed magazine covers, brand campaign sketches, the quiet hum of machines in the next room where my team was already working. If only he knew. I pressed my lips together and whispered, Okay, Dad. Come over this weekend. We'll talk. Because maybe it was finally time to show him what pointless had become. I set the phone down, the sound of my own heartbeat filling the silence. A story years in the making was about to come full circle. I was 21 when I first told my dad I wasn't going to law school. We were sitting at the kitchen table, that same table where I'd once done my homework while Mom hummed and Dad read the newspaper. Only this time, the air felt heavier. I got accepted into the Parsons design program, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I want to study visual design, branding, illustration, that's what I love. Dad looked up from his paper, his brow furrowing like I'd just confessed a crime. Design? Lila, that's not a career. That's a hobby. You're smart. Use it for something that matters. I am using it for something that matters, I whispered. He scoffed. No, you're running away from reality. You think drawing on a tablet is going to pay your bills? You'll be back here in a year asking me for help. I remember the lump in my throat, the way my fingers dug into my jeans under the table. Mom stayed quiet, her eyes darting between us, torn like always. When I stood to leave, my knees almost buckled, but I didn't let him see. As I grabbed my bag, my grandmother's voice echoed in my head. She'd passed away 2 years earlier, but her words stayed with me. If your art scares them, it's because they can't imagine a world that brave. Don't stop painting it. That night, I packed a single suitcase and left. I didn't have much, a secondhand laptop, a sketchbook, a camera I bought on credit. But I had one thing my dad didn't believe I did, faith. Faith that what I was building meant something, even if no one could see it yet. The next few months were brutal. I worked 2 jobs, barista by morning, freelance designer by night. There were nights I cried into a cup of cold ramen, wondering if he'd been right. Every rejection email, every late rent notice felt like proof that maybe I was chasing smoke. But then, every time I thought about quitting, I'd touch the small silver pendant Grandma had given me, a tiny paintbrush charm. It reminded me who I was fighting for. Not just for me, but for the girl who believed her art could change something. So I kept going, even when my hands shook, even when my dad stopped calling, even when the world said no. That's where it all began. In that silence, in that stubborn heartbeat that refused to quit. The first year in New York felt like walking barefoot over broken glass, painful, humbling, but weirdly awakening. Days blurred into nights, nights into deadlines. I lived in a studio apartment so small that when I stretched my arms, I could touch both walls. The paint peeled near the window, and the heater wheezed like it was on its last breath. I designed logos for $20 a piece on freelance sites, edited photos for bloggers who never credited me, and spent weekends volunteering at art exhibitions just to be around people who got it. Then one night, while I was sketching on my tablet at a late-night cafe, a woman noticed my screen. She was in her 50s, silver hair, eyes sharp but kind. You've got an eye for emotional branding, she said, sliding her business card toward me. Clara Donovan, creative director, Halo Agency. That moment changed everything. Clara became my mentor, my first real believer. She taught me not just how to create, but how to value what I created. Under her wing, I learned contracts, clients, deadlines, the business side of art. She used to say, "Talent opens doors, Lila. But knowing your worth keeps them open." Within 2 years, I was leading small campaigns for startups. Within 4, my designs were featured in Vogue's digital cover. I'd gone from freelancing in a shoebox apartment to owning a design collective, Bennett Visuals, a team of 12 brilliant artists who created brand identities for luxury labels.
But I didn't tell my family.
Not yet. Every Christmas call went the same, Dad asking, "You still doing those sketches?" And me replying, "Yeah, something like that." He'd sigh, tell me to think about real stability, and I'd laugh it off, hiding the fact that I was paying my team's salaries and donating to charities under an alias. The truth was, I didn't need them to know. Success, for me, wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. It was about proving me right. Still, some nights, when I walked through my office, all glass walls, soft light, creative energy buzzing, I'd pause at the framed paintbrush pendant on my desk. Grandma's charm. It reminded me why I'd started, not to win, but to become. By the time Forbes listed Bennett Visuals among the top rising design studios, I was already planning quietly for my next project, a foundation to fund young female artists who were told their dreams were pointless. I wanted to be the voice I never had. And yet, even with everything I'd built, there was a tiny ache left behind, one shaped like my father's voice, saying, "This isn't real." I'd moved mountains, but part of me still wanted him to see the view from the top. So when that phone call came, his demand, his assumption, I didn't feel anger. I felt readiness. It was time to let the truth walk into the same room where I once walked out. Saturday came draped in autumn gold, sunlight soft as silk, brushing against the tall windows of my studio. I'd asked my dad and mom to come over for lunch. I didn't tell them where exactly, just sent the address. When they arrived, I watched from the mezzanine floor as they stepped through the glass doors of Bennett Visuals. Dad looked around, squinting under the high ceilings and soft pendant lights. There were framed campaign posters on the walls, subtle, elegant branding that had once lit up Times Square. Mom's eyes widened at the sight of the minimalist sculptures, the digital art screens gently looping my team's recent work. "This place is beautiful," Mom whispered, her voice trembling with pride and disbelief. Dad, though, crossed his arms. "Fancy office. Must cost a fortune to rent." He didn't notice the small plaque by the front desk that read, "Bennett Visuals, founded and directed by Lila Bennett." I came down the stairs slowly, my heels clicking against the marble steps. He turned, and for the first time in years, I saw something flicker in his eyes that wasn't criticism. It was confusion. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Mom." I smiled gently. Mom rushed to hug me, her perfume mixing with the faint scent of coffee and printer ink, oddly comforting. Dad just stood there. "You work here?" he asked. I tilted my head. "Not exactly." Then I gestured for them to follow me. We walked past glass-walled conference rooms where my designers were in creative sessions, their laughter soft but confident. Past shelves stacked with brand awards, magazine features, even a small silver frame of my first $20 freelance logo, the one that started it all. I stopped in front of my office door. On it, etched in brass, Lila Bennett, creative director and founder. Dad froze. "Founder," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "Yes." I turned to him, meeting his gaze. "This is my company, the one that's been called pointless since I started it." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. So I kept going calmly. "We handle campaigns for international brands now. The office you're standing in? Bought it last year. Paid in full. No loans." Mom's hand went to her mouth. Tears welled up instantly. "Oh, Lila, I had no idea." "I know," I said softly. "I never told you. It was easier that way." Dad looked around, his expression shifting, pride and regret wrestling behind his eyes. Finally, he exhaled. "You built all this from drawing on a tablet?" I smiled faintly. "From believing I could." He laughed nervously, trying to mask emotion. "Well, I suppose I underestimated you." Then came the familiar defensiveness, the instinct he'd lived with for decades. Still, you could have told us. We would have helped. I met his gaze, not angry, just steady. Dad, you did help me, I said. Every time you doubted me, I had to prove to myself that you were wrong. That became my fuel. The silence that followed was thick, almost sacred. He sat down on the edge of my leather chair, rubbing his temples. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, I replied gently. Just see it. Feel it. This is what your daughter's pointless career looks like. For a long moment, no one spoke. The city's hum filled the air, distant sirens, laughter, the rhythm of life outside. And then Dad looked up, eyes softening in a way I'd never seen. I was wrong, Lila. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest thing to one. And for the first time in years, it was enough. Dad sat across from me in my office, hands clasped tightly, the same hands that once slammed the table when I said I wanted to study art. Now they trembled just slightly, resting on mahogany that I had bought. Mom stayed quiet, her eyes still roaming the room, as if trying to catch up with the years she'd missed. She finally whispered, "We're proud of you, honey, so proud." I smiled, but my chest felt heavy. Thank you, Mom.
I know you mean that.
Then I turned to Dad. You said you wanted me to cover the family's expenses. Let's talk about that. He shifted uneasily. Lila, I didn't mean. I raised a hand, stopping him softly. No, it's okay. I'll help. But I need to set a few conditions. He frowned, confused. Conditions? I nodded.
Yeah.
Not because I owe anyone anything, but because I want to make sure we don't repeat the past. I took a deep breath. First, if I'm covering anything for the family, we talk to each other with respect. No more calling dreams pointless. No more comparing who's successful. We all work hard in our own ways. Mom nodded immediately, tears glimmering. That's fair, sweetheart. Second, I continued. If I help with Daniel's tuition, he studies what he loves, not what's practical. I'll fund his education on one condition, that he chooses passion over pressure. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. And lastly, I said, my voice soft but firm, you both have to let me be your daughter again. Not your project, not your disappointment. Just your daughter. For a moment, there was silence. Then Dad leaned back, his eyes glistening, something raw breaking through the pride. I never realized how much damage those words did, he said slowly. I thought I was protecting you from failure. You were protecting me from the life you feared, I replied. But failure was what built me. I needed to fall, to grow, to fight for something that was mine. He swallowed hard, looking down at the desk. You're right. I smiled faintly. I know. Then I reached into my drawer and pulled out an envelope, a check with my company's logo. This will cover Mom's treatments and Daniel's semester. After that, let's rebuild things, not out of guilt, but out of love. Mom's tears finally fell, quiet and grateful. Dad stood, hesitated for a second, and then, for the first time since I was a child, pulled me into a hug. It wasn't perfect, not smooth or easy, but it was real. As he whispered, "Thank you," I could feel decades of distance melting away. I wasn't forgiving to make him feel better. I was forgiving because I was free. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl trying to prove her worth. I was the woman deciding what it meant. The next few weeks moved like a quiet tide, slow, gentle, healing. My parents started visiting the studio more often. Mom would bring homemade cookies for the team, pretending it was just to see the place, but I knew she loved being part of it now. Even Dad began asking small questions about projects, clients, how the design world worked. He didn't always understand, but this time he tried. One afternoon, he stopped by alone. I was reviewing campaign drafts when he stepped into my office, holding something in his hand, the small box that once sat on my childhood bookshelf. I found this while cleaning out the attic, he said quietly. Inside was Grandma's silver paintbrush pendant. I smiled as I picked it up, the cool metal pressing against my skin, grounding me in a way nothing else could. She'd be proud of you, Dad said. I think I finally understand what she saw. I met his eyes, steady, kind. It took us a while, didn't it? He chuckled softly.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you didn't give up on yourself. Even when I did. When he left, I stood by the window, the city stretching endlessly before me. The same skyline that once terrified me now looked like home. I thought about that girl who left with one suitcase and a trembling heart, and how she'd built something from the pieces no one wanted. I walked to my desk, picked up the pendant, and looped it around my neck. It felt like a circle closing, the same courage that once pushed me away now bringing me peace. Downstairs, my team was laughing, planning the next big campaign, a global project for women entrepreneurs. I smiled, realizing how far the word pointless had traveled. It had become power, purpose, possibility. As I closed my laptop and looked out at the fading skyline, the voice inside me, the one that had always whispered, "Keep going," finally spoke with calm certainty. Turns out, my pointless career paid for more than bills. It paid for my freedom. And this time, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of peace, of pride, of every version of me that never stopped believing.